What up, though? This is AAS 477, week 10. We've made it to the end. This is the last week of the 477 um, Power and Protest Civil Rights class. If you are here, that means that either one, you've been with me. Two, this is your first time and you're just getting here. I'm going to go through the pleasantries real quick, and I just want to kind of jump into what we got going today. So this is week 10. So I started this class 10 weeks ago to continue on the AAS 477 train. I started the first class in February for Black History Month, and I did the economics of Jim Crow. After that was over, we started the civil rights class going from 1954 all the way to 1968, and we're here at 1968 today. We have a lot of really good things to talk about, and we're going to move through it. And then we're going to, navigate our way through the next kind of spaces that we got in front of us. So without further ado, so week 10, this is a good week this week. This week we go through the final years. I call it the promised land. We go through the final years of Dr. King's life and how he changed his stance on the Vietnam War and wanted to put more of an emphasis on economics and the Poor People's Campaign, how that tied into the sanitation workers strike in Memphis, where he gave his last speech and ultimately lost his life and was assassinated. And then we look and we'll firm up what happened during the Tent City, the end of Poor People's Campaign, Tent City in Washington, D.C. And then we'll look at just the lasting legacy of Dr. King and just the class in general. Thoroughly enjoyed the course. That's what's up. That's what's up. And we got more coming. So this is it's a bittersweet day for me. 10 weeks ago we started this. I put my heart, my soul, my blood, my sweat, my tears, my being into this. So it feels good to get to completion, but it also feels kind of empty because it's like, man, it's over. Where do we start? And so we'll be talking about kind of where we'll be moving forward after this. So let's look at I call this the final exam, but this is kind of just the a rundown of how we got to this point in the class. So week 1, we started with the seeds of civil rights, where we looked at Emmett Till and his murder, and the impact and the kickoff kind of that had to the civil rights movement. We also talked about the Montgomery bus boycott, the over a year that they spent in Montgomery boycotting the buses to say, until we can ride on the front or until we can ride where we should, we're not going to ride. And the economic, the strategic discipline it took to do that. That's where our story kicked off with the Montgomery Improvement Association and Dr. King being centered as the leader of that. Week 2, we talked school desegregation. We brought the students in. We talked about the Little Rock 9 and how they made their plight through integrating into Central High School in Little Rock and everything that went along with that. We also looked at James Meredith and his plight into integrating the University of Mississippi and everything that took. There were, for both of them, there were riots, there were National Guard deployments, with the end result being, the students being able to integrate those institutions. And in Montgomery, those people being able to ride that bus. Week 3, we jumped into student action, more student action with the Greensboro 4 and how they kicked off the lunch counter sit-ins, the nonviolent, peaceful, direct action lunch counter sit-ins, and how it blazed across the country, and the impact that they had. Also in Nashville, they were a part of that movement as well, and where it really got all the eyes on it, where Diane Nash and James Meredith, John Lewis, kicked that off, and how that translated to the start of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and how that kind of stayed with us throughout the story. We also talked about the Freedom Rides in 1961, where students went from Washington, D.C. all the way down to Jackson, Mississippi, to challenge the Interstate Commerce Commission ruling that interstate accommodations had to be desegregated, and everything that came along with that, the beatings that they took, the jail time that they took, the discipline and the nonviolent action that they were able to take, the strategic actions that they made, the sacrifices they made, which moved us into week 4, called Lessons on the Ground, where we talked about the lessons that were learned in a very interesting case in Albany, where some of the tactics and strategies that were used successfully elsewhere kind of were, undermined, and, was kind of seen as a loss for Dr. King and the SCLC. That's also where the students and the SCLC started to kind of see things differently. And we saw that kind of move on throughout the conversation. We also looked at the win in Birmingham and the Children's Crusade, where children were putting themselves on the line to go to jail and to be shot with hoses and dogs sicked on them, and the national eye on them, and bringing an end to the segregation practices in Birmingham, Alabama. We finished that week talking about the March on Washington, 1963, where it was kind of a pinnacle moment where Dr. King and the Civil Rights Big Six were able to mobilize the entire network of civil rights workers, and they brought millions of people down to Washington to do a march, and where he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And then also that was the passing of the Civil Rights Act. And then we went to the Freedom Summer between 62 and 64. We looked at Medgar Evers and his life, at his assassination down in Mississippi. We looked at the Freedom Summer, where CORE organized these freedom schools down in Mississippi, and the beauty that was the strategic approach that they took to go into every city to teach people on the right to vote, and teach them kind of history, culture, all those great things that were happening. We saw that the movement started to integrate itself, and you started to see more whites, more professionals join outside of just your traditional students and kind of church folk. We looked at the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party of 1964, also in Mississippi, and with Franny Lou Hamer and the Lowndes County. Well, we'll get to that movement, where they went to the Democratic Convention in 64 to gain representation, and we saw how that didn't end up the way they wanted, but it still sprouted for some other things to happen there. Week 6, we got to Selma, where we looked at the Selma March, really where we started to see more of a changing between the students and SCLC, and how that ultimately ended in civil rights legislation, the Voting Rights Act being passed, and which was seen as kind of the last traditional civil rights march of the era. We then moved to Black Power, where we looked at Malcolm X and his emergence in his life and as a thought leader. He was really, really, really impacting the students, and it kind of was really helping pull the students in a new direction. We looked at the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was the seeds of the Black Panthers, and how they organized outside of the Democratic or the Republican Party. And we started to see the emergence of Stokely Carmichael and his Black Power narrative. We also talked about the March Against Fear in 1966, where James Meredith, who we talked about earlier, after he integrated Ole Miss, more of like a lone ranger himself, he went down and said, I'm marching from Memphis to Jackson, Mississippi, and he got shot the second day in. And also at that time, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee elected Stokely Carmichael to be their executive director. So now you have Stokely that's high on the horse of Black Power, and Dr. King still riding the hope of nonviolent direct action, and how that tension eventually kind of led to not dissension, but growth in the movement. 2 weeks ago, the Fight Up South, we looked at Dr. King in Chicago and how the Chicago Freedom Movement looked at how, or Dr. King and his team wanted to see how nonviolent direct action would work in the North, and started a organization called the Chicago Freedom Movement, and the trials and tribulations they had, which eventually kind of was another loss, quote unquote, for Dr. King, but another kind of feather in the hat of those who said we need more local organizing, not just people coming in and dropping in. We looked at the Watts uprising in 1965 as we started to see the idea of power, the idea of we tired of this, we sick of this starting to take place. We looked at the uprisings in 1967 in Detroit, and Watts in Detroit were the kickoffs for what would be a very, very hot summer in 1967, where over 100 riots broke out. Last week, we talked about political power, Carl Stokes and his rise to power as the first Black mayor of a major city. Cleveland was the 10th largest city in the country at the time, and he was the first Black mayor there. And the strategic approach that he made in a 65% white city. How do you take a Black man and strategically place him in an election to win? And we also last week talked about the Black Panther Party and their rise to power in Oakland, looking at Black power through the lens of political self-determination. And so now we're here at the mountaintop, where we're looking at the Poor People's Campaign and the sanitation workers fight. So that was a long way to say we've come a long way. It's been such a fulfilling journey, and it's, for me, it's really only getting started because we got a lot more to talk about. So we've looked at where kind of we've got to here. And so now let's take a look at, let's set the stage here for our last discussion here on the mountaintop. And I called it mountaintop because if you we'll look at it later, we'll look at a piece of Dr. King's final speech where he said he's been to the mountaintop, an ode to Moses. So let me bring up my deck and then we'll get started here. Again, if you have any questions, if you have any feedback, drop it in the chat. Be sure to share and like this YouTube video so we can get some more eyes on it. Because one, I'm giving away this for free because one, the game is to be told, not to be sold. But also, you know, living in the times that we're in, it's good to go back and look at what our ancestors were able to get done during this tough time and how we can look at their lessons and put them into play as we move forward, you know, in our times. If you've been looking at the news at all, if you've been following what's been going on in Los Angeles, very interesting. It's kind of like we're living in the past again, looking at what's going on out there. So that's interesting. So let's bring this up. So week 10, we on the mountaintop. And so here we are, you know, here's an introduction and context into where we are at this point. So to this point, we've had, you know, legislative milestones, which were absolutely amazing. You can never undercut or not give the props to the civil rights activists who were able to get this done. This stuff wasn't on the books before they started protesting and doing all those things we just talked about. So we saw the Civil Rights Act of 64, which was about public accommodations, desegregating public accommodations. We looked at the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which didn't give us the right to vote. We got that in the 15th Amendment, but it gave the federal government an eye over people down in the South who were putting in poll taxes and literacy tests and grandfather clauses and all this stuff. But by 67, we started to see a focus or a shift in de facto segregation. So you start to say the fact is by fact, you know, not to come here. De jure is more of, you know, undercover kind of thing. So we started to look at the North and the West to say, you know, it's changing. And people who came up North, you know, from the Great Migration looking for more opportunities, you know, we started to see what was going on in the South start to happen again in the North. And we started to see cities going on fire in the North and in the West because of this unrest of what was going on. We also looked at the emergence of Black power, and all that meant, I keep going back over it over and over and over again. We want to determine, you know, we want self-determination over our communities, our economics, our politics, and our lives. We don't want to be at the request of Southern or Northern whites. We want to be able to control our own economics, our own political future, our own personal future, and we want to be able to live where we want to, worship where we want to. We want to be able to maneuver how we want to maneuver, raise our kids the way we want to, have a bright future, and live that American dream that is said that we had in the Constitution as American citizens. And so this brings us to where we are today. So Dr. King and his plight. So we talked about, you know, the last time we talked about Dr. King, he was in Chicago and leading the nonviolent march up north. And this was a change of business for him. Usually they were in Montgomery. They were in Jackson, Mississippi. They were down in the thralls of Southern life. They wanted to bring it up north. They, you know, were successful because, you know, they endeavored, but it wasn't as successful as they thought at that time in the country, because I mentioned the uprisings in Detroit, the uprisings in Watts, the American public, the plight in Vietnam. So they were like, okay, look, we gave you what you needed. You got your Civil Rights Act. Now get your black asses on, and we got other stuff to worry about. That was the public sentiment. And so you get up north and they tried some of those tactics and they're like, man, we ain't worried about that. We gave you all these laws. We focus on Vietnam. We focus on our kids now because they're getting sent to war. This stuff is happening. The country is changing. And so now Dr. King is saying, all right, we got to have a new strategy. You know, Now that you can integrate a lunch counter, that's cool. But what if you can't afford the burger? What if you can't afford to feed your kids? What if you can't afford? And off the notion of, this country was 400, 500 years in the rears of paying for the folks who built it. All of the progress that came from slave labor, everything that came from the slave economy, we got to kind of figure out how we can handle some of these poor peoples. So he was he was progressing in his ideology to say, now it's time to talk economics. And now that people would say that's what got him killed. But now that it's going from, okay, we have some rights on the books. So now let's center our work around poverty and how we can make it right by lifting up the lowest of them. This was a really big shift because it was just kind of, peacefully, we go along with you. The federal government was our friend. So we wanted to ensure, when I say we, that we were on the side of the government, and we pushed the government to do what we needed. Taking a stance against the war was a huge effort. And Dr. King was, it was kind of two things. One, he made a lot of friends in Washington with LBJ. LBJ passed the Civil Rights Act. He passed the or he was responsible for pushing through the Voters' Rights Act because civil rights workers were bringing it to the forefront. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. So, there was a nice relationship there between LBJ and Dr. King and civil rights. Well, this, Dr. King came out and said, I ain't for the war. I ain't for none of that. Kind of at the bequest of Stokely Carmichael, but saying that it's unfair. You sending the wrong people there. We got problems here. What you spend in a day there could deal with what we got for poverty here. And so we made a lot of new enemies. People from the movement, NACP, some of these other people were saying, well, you tripping, bruh. Remember, we talked about this earlier in the class when we were talking about, it was the last class, the economics of Jim Crow class, where when World War II was happening and the double V campaign was going on and saying, well, it's two victories we need to fight for: a victory against the war powers and the victory at home against the Jim Crow. It ain't time for that. Same thing they were saying here. No, Dr. King, it ain't time for that. This ain't that. This ain't no little civil rights. This is freedom in America in red, white, and blue. And so he caught a lot of flack from LBJ. Their relationship was over. It was done. From other civil rights leaders, other people in the Black community saying, nah, you tripping, bro. And so, he's really kind of isolating himself, from being, he was like, let me take a step back. He was never the popular guy that we know and we love today. He was never that. If you remember back how Colin Kaepernick was treated, same for Ali, and we'll talk about him later. How Colin Kaepernick was treated when he was taking a knee. Oh, he's the worst person. He's the worst person on earth. That's what Dr. King was seen as in America back then. He wasn't a holiday and we love him and we take the day off. He wasn't none of that. He was seen as a terrorist, public enemy number one. He was seen like a Bin Laden kind of a person. You a traitor. He was seen like that. So it wasn't like he was losing the popularity contest, but he was even more isolating because he was losing the stature that he had there. He felt it. So this also caused for the FBI. We talked about COINTELPRO a bit, and we'll talk about that a lot more in the class next time. COINTELPRO and the government, the FBI started pressing harder on Dr. King. Cap still paying for that, yeah. Do you think Stokely Carmichael set him up by telling them to speak on the war? So no, I don't think that, because Dr. King. So when Dr. King started to take a step back, he started to say, okay, these legislative victories aren't benefiting us. So it was two things. Let me take a step back. Let me take two steps back. The uprisings in major cities in the country really were a telltale sign. When Dr. King got to Chicago, and he got to really see, because he moved his whole family there. They wasn't down south no more. They moved to the west side slums. And this is what people always got wrong about Dr. King. Though Dr. King was a doctor, though Dr. King was a talented 10th, Dr. King didn't move that way. Like, he moved to the ghetto, you know what I'm saying, among the people. So he got the chance to see firsthand how those people lived. He wasn't the type to say, I'm about to go out to the burbs and live out there, then I'm gonna come down here and fight with you. So he got a chance to see boots on the ground, pun intended, every single day what poverty looked like. what it looked like to young men, what it looked like to young women, what it looked like to mothers, what it looked like to fathers, what it looked like to men who couldn't find work, what it looked like to people who just wanted to live. So he got a chance to see, like, man, yeah, you can go vote all you want, but you can't, you got rats and roaches, you can't eat, ain't no poverty program, and this shit is crazy. So he got a chance to see firsthand. And then every city that went up in flames, Dr. King would find himself there. I don't think he made it to Detroit, but he made his way to those places and talked to people. So his ideas were starting to change. Like, man, it ain't just about integrating the lunch counter. It's about having a means by which to make a living. So as Stokely started to come into his own and started to say, look, man, we need economic determination of what we're doing, Dr. King was like, you know what? You might be right, because when I was in Chicago, I saw this. When I went out to Watts and talked to the kids, I heard this. When I went out to talk to the preachers here, they talked about that. When I went to here, they talked about that. And one thing we kind of lose in Dr. King, he was always more radical, but because of the seat he sat in and the position he had, he always had to kind of walk that line between saying, okay, what can realistically be done and my feelings to be damned. Dr. King was a advocate for guns. He carried guns. He was that kind of brother. He knew how to. He wasn't shy on that. But nonviolence and that ideology was what they were using to get the wins. So he stayed in that. But he was never. Dr. King was a lot more polarizing than what we kind of knew about him. I didn't understand it until I started reading more of his works. So, and I'm still answering your question. So as Stokely Carmichael kind of was pulling him more into this Black Power kind of, and I don't want to say Black Power, but more of a nuanced perspective. You know, Dr. King wasn't one to be moved so easily. And so, and this was kind of before Stokely Carmichael got in the fire. We'll talk about that a lot more in the next class. Stokely Carmichael wasn't really in the fire yet. And so he was kind of sharing to the doctor, because in Selma, they worked hand in hand. And in the March Against Fear, the one I just talked about where James Meredith got shot, they were working hand to hand. And so Dr. King was pulling him this way, they were pulling each other that way, and they were the only, I don't want to say they're the only, they were two huge minds where they both found comfort in being able to build with one another. And so I don't think he set him up. I think I'll talk about where I think he was set up. And so Dr. King was saying, as a man of God, as a man of, as a preacher, I'm saying that war is wrong. The same way I said it was our moral obligation in this country to stop racism, supremacy, and segregation. That was a moral issue. This is a moral issue. War, I ain't with that. I ain't for that in just the war sense. And then two, add poverty on top of it, we can use this money, we can use this effort in a better way. So Dr. King was really kind of moving his stance. Also, I think because the government and COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program of FDR, his name is escaping my mind right now, Hoover, it was pulling him in this direction. I'll drop a couple books and interviews where you can start to see he was slowly but surely making this change. And then also, you know, it was, and I hope that answered the question. So also what was starting to get this rolling was, as we've seen, and if anything pop off now, we'll see it again, you know, Vietnam, they sending the Black folks to the front lines first, sending them. So the same people who was just fighting for their rights, the same people who just can't get a job, who can't do this, now you send them to be drafted A1 and sending them to Vietnam and to die disproportionately. So we saying this is having such an impact. When I went to Watts, when I went to Chicago, when I'm talking to people whose sons went to war and other folks who didn't have to. So all these things were kind of building to get them there. Let's see here. Okay, cool. Now, Stokely Carmichael, he's going to have his own problems here later as we get into the conversation, as COINTELPRO starts to really, really build. And one of the main reasons, I'll preview it now, that the Black Power movement kind of fizzled the way that it did is because you had the same power you had America in Vietnam. You had that same use of the government's power against these Black power organizations. And they did everything they could to undermine and dismantle them. And, you know, it's tough to fight against the American government. Everybody can see that. So yeah, so that's kind of where we are with Dr. King and why we're here. The uprisings, like I said, in 1967 there were 100 uprisings in cities across the country, and they were all about access to jobs, access to police brutality, racial inequality in the Black communities. And we'll talk more about the Kerner Commission. So to make a long story short, and I talked about it a bit last time, after all these uprisings happened, and I have the link already. I dropped it in the last week's or 2 weeks ago notes. LBJ put together, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who's the president at the time, put together a commission to study what the heck is going on in these cities. And basically they came out and said, people ain't got no jobs, police brutality, they need better education, they need better things. And the other week I called it two societies. Basically they said there's two societies, a white one and a Black one. And if we don't solve for this, things are going to get worse. And this commission came out, but instead of adhering and listening to some of these policies, he said, we got other big things going on and I ain't dealing with it. So there was an effort to look at, and they were pretty honest in their assessment of what was going on in this country. He, because of limited bandwidth and maybe need to or want to, didn't necessarily take heed to what was going on. And we'll see how that further impacted the country. Okay, so let me stop here. Let me remove this for a moment and let me settle up to where we are. So the Poor People's Campaign. So in response to saying that this is what we think, okay, so now we understand that, all right, cool. Economics is our issue now. We got our target. The same way in Selma, they had a target. In Birmingham, they had a target. In Albany, they had a target. So now they had a new target. Now we're going to deal with poverty on a wide scale. And because poverty was so wide reaching, well, one thing I forgot to say. So by the 60s, by the mid 60s or the late 60s, we're starting to see a lot of different things. We're starting to see deindustrialization. And that just basically means, and I talked about this last week, but I'll go through it quick. In the 30s, we saw a depression. Well, in the 20s, it was the roaring 20s. In the 30s, depression came. And the way we got out of that depression as a country were through the New Deal. The New Deal were a set of government interventions that tried to spur the economy, programs that put people back to work, that gave new opportunities to Americans. Still, Blacks were kind of redlined out of some of those opportunities as well. In the 40s, World War II, we went to war. So we cranked back up by using our industrial might to build guns and tanks and everything in the war effort. So that got us going. By the 50s, so if you think about Make America Great Again, that slogan means two things. One, a segregated society, and an America that's economically viable for white folks. That's what it basically means, just real talk. So the 50s was that Make America Great Again. You notice our class was all through the 50s, so it wasn't great for us. But that the 50s, we were kind of on that upward swing from everything that happened in the war. 40s, if you needed a job, you had one in these factories that were still producing. America was roaring. But as you start to get further away from that, you start to see it deindustrialization. So by the time you get to the 60s, we don't need all those war instruments no more. We don't need all these factories producing this stuff. We're starting to see things slow up. And so a lot of the unemployment, a lot of the problems that were happening in these urban areas it was good when people could go to work, but now you can't. Now if you're the first hired, the last hire, you're the first fired. Opportunities are changing. The North's perspective of African Americans are changing, because where it used to be, okay, we got some numbers a little bit. You got millions of people that came from the South and came to New York, DC, Chicago, Gary, Cleveland, Detroit, you name it, California, LA. So you got all these people there, and now you're over flooding, you got housing issues, employment issues, and so you're seeing you're not seeing the opportunities you want. And that's even happening in other societies, or other cultures. So you see in this Poor People's Campaign, a lot of people ain't eating it. It ain't just the people down south, it's people in Watts, people in Detroit, people all over this country in these major cities. So you're starting to see, there's an issue around poverty in this country. Now, at the same time, we was going to the moon and all this other stuff and using our money for war, wasn't using it for the people at home. So they said, okay, we got to target poor people. Let's bring together a multicultural, right? We all cousins, right? We're bringing together a multicultural, a multi-class, a multi-religious group to say, let's bring all these folks from all around the country who poor, and let's house them on the mall in DC. So that's the plan. Take you all these poor folks around the country, build a city on the mall, the Washington Monument, all the way to the same place you did the March on Washington, and let's bring them there and show them as a protest. These are the poor people. Let's follow it up with lobby days. Let's bring these people to Washington so they have to deal with it. It's kind of the last call for like nonviolence, because now Black Power is moving. People are not kind of feeling it no more. We burn, baby, burn was the adage. Now it wasn't direct nonviolent action like we saw in the 50s, in the early 60s. Now it's like burn, baby, burn. Cops do something, we ain't gonna let them hit us over the head. Burn this bitch down, like we saw in all these cities around here. So December 1st, 1967, the Poor People's Campaign start with the strategy. One thing I've been trying to show throughout this class is it wasn't just people waking up one morning and saying, we're going outside now. No, these were some of the best, brightest, and most well-versed minds on how to strategically organize, mobilize people into getting what we need. So they started the campaign. Dr. King celebrated a birthday, turning 39. So this is his 39th year, his last year. And the problem or the issue was, okay, what can we really get done with this? We want to bring all these people to DC. What can we do? What can we do? What can't we do? And it's basically, okay, we're going to do it and we're going to make something happen. Like I mentioned earlier, LBJ was running for re-election because the way he got into office, and I didn't talk a lot about this, the way he got into office was JFK got killed, assassinated, and he took over. And so his first run for office was 64, where he, won. Now we're getting to 68, 67, 68. He has to run for re-election for his own presidency, his own second term. And at that time, the Tet Offensive was in full swing in Vietnam. And that was basically, we thought as Americans, we had Vietnam under wrap and we were headed in the right direction. Easy war, we done. The Viet Cong flipped the switch and was whooping us. And so American morale was down. The call for civil rights was down. And they're saying, look, my sons and our nation is getting whooped. And we ain't got no love for what's going on. So LBJ is losing support. And so he's having a tough time. And it also brought Wallace, who we talked about before, and RFK into the race. So LBJ is up into his neck with political opposition, trying to deal with this, and he ain't got no time for civil rights. And you got Dr. King saying, "I'm not standing with you no more." And so it's so many things happening during this time. So as they finally want to get the Poor People's March together, Poor People's March is going. They're looking to recruit. They're looking to get people around the country involved, and Dr. King is having, and his surrogates are having the damnedest time. They're going to Harlem like, hey man, we want to do this march, we want to get this done. They're like, look man, we ain't got no time for no nonviolent. We tired of that. They're going to Chicago, hey man, we trying to do this thing. No, we ain't got no time for nonviolence. Okay, some of them like, okay, we with you still. So they're having the damnedest time recruiting. They're going down south, and even cats down south is like, look man, we tired of this nonviolent. We gonna burn, baby, burn. And so they're having the damnedest time recruiting. And so, during this time, Dr. King gets a call from an old buddy and saying, we got some problems going on in Memphis. The sanitation workers are striking and we want you to come down here. And he's saying, dang, man, I'm in the middle of doing something. And his comrades are like, man, we in the middle of doing something. You can't go down there. So he like, look, all they need from me is a speech. I'm going to go down there in Memphis. I'm going to talk to these folks. Do a couple speeches and we're gonna keep it moving. So let's take a quick segue from the Poor People's Campaign to the Memphis strike. So Dr. King, even before Dr. King gets there, Memphis, Tennessee. And I want to take some time on this because the Memphis strike, the sanitation workers strike, ain't had nothing to do with Dr. King at first. It was the people of Memphis, and specifically the sanitation workers, the trash workers, the trash men, who were sick and tired of what was going on and was looking for better wages and better work conditions. So another thing that I tried to really get through in this course was that the civil rights movement was built on hyper local acts. It wasn't just this one big swoop where Dr. King was responsible for everything. No, the people in Albany were already organizing and doing their thing. And when they needed the larger troops to come in, Dr. King could come in, SNCC could come in, people could come in. The people in specific cities were the movement. It wasn't just one man, one group, one face. People in Toledo, people in Birmingham, the people of Montgomery, the people of all these different places were the people who started the civil rights movement. That's why I have here people. It wasn't just, Dr. King and them saying, we're about to go to this one place and get it popping here. No, local people through local NAACP chapters, local churches, local student organizations were organizing in their own space. And then they just called for help when they needed it. So again, in Memphis, and Memphis had a history of activism. So during the New Deal 30s, and I'm gonna catch up here because I gotta tie them together. These things are happening together. So we're gonna be bouncing back between Memphis, poor people. So when I talk about the Poor People's Campaign and they were organizing, Memphis was organizing too. And even as Dr. King is spending time in Memphis and we're talking about Memphis, the Poor People's Campaign is still happening. So we're more than one thing is happening at once, and that's important for this story. So Memphis had a history of organizing. During the New Deal in the 30s, Black people were organizing the Congress of Industrial Organizations. But it saw a tough end because people were trying to tie Black organizing into communism, which was something that, at that time we weren't having here in the country. And so it kind of put a snuff on some of the work they were doing in Memphis above the board, still organizing underground. And then in the 60s, when the student sit-in started to kick off, that reignited a lot of other things. So students were sitting in, church folks were sitting in, all kind of folks were sitting in. So it kind of reinvigorated 1960, the movement. And so, at that time, we still were a lot, by and large, industrial blue collar workers. So in 1964, Local 1733 of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees organized under the leadership of T.O. Jones. However, the city refused to work with him. If you remember me back from the last class, A. Philip Randolph organized the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first Black union in the country, and they had their problems took them 10 years to get recognized and organized. So the same thing was happening down there. So it's a problem between the city and the workers. The cities, and this is Memphis, so the cities are saying, we don't know what you're talking about. Take your Black asses back to work, and maybe we'll deal with you, maybe we won't. And they're saying, nah. So you get to January of 68, the union accused the sanitation department and the local government of racial bias. Well, a couple days later, 2 Black workers were killed in a trash truck, and then the families told that they couldn't get any of the benefits that the workers had. And I won't go further into it for time's sake, but these 2 brothers were in, it was terrible conditions. So when it was rainy or when it was unappealing conditions out there to protect themselves, they would hide in some of the areas. Just this day after they did that, the truck went, smashed them, and it really started a uprising. The 2 gentlemen were Ethel Cole and Robert Walker. 2 other men died that way a couple years earlier. So this ain't just by accident. Y'all doing this on purpose. So by February 12th, 68, 1,300 of the workers went on strike, demanded higher wages, time and a half for overtime, dues checkoffs, safety measures, and pay for rainy days. Again, the mayor wasn't trying to hear that. They wasn't trying to maneuver. And so they said, fine, we leaving the job. We out. We ain't doing none of what you want us to do. We leaving the job. You deal with this trash yourself and until you want to work with us. If you ever seen any of those pictures that held the sign, I am a man, this was that. So by February, now we moving. There was 10,000 noticeable piles of trash around the city. And the mayor, Loeb, he started strike breaking and basically using police escorts to cause violence and knock people's heads off. Now, at this time, Memphis was still using the tactics of nonviolence. So, nonviolence was still the rule of the day down south, and that's what they were using. So one day they were out marching, and this is all through local organizing and local practices, the local church, the local black leaders. Cops came and started doing what they do to protesters. And that's when the call was sent to Dr. King to come down. And so city of Memphis was worried when they heard Dr. King was coming, because usually Dr. King delivered results, especially down south. And so Dr. King came and gave a speech. If you remember the speech, all labor has dignity, and kind of organizing the people and saying, all right, well, let's get it popping. So the Poor People's Campaign was about a month out, and Dr. King and his getting on the phone with his surrogates, like, okay, what's going on? We got everything going. We got everything good. It's good, but where you at, Doc? We need you. We need your approval for this. We need this. We need this. We need that. He's saying, well, I might spend a little more time down here because I see what they're doing. It's on the economics, is what we've been talking about anyway. And this is kind of where I'm at right now. I'm holding both. So if you ever had to put you working in two campaigns, that's what he was doing. And so King said, okay, he left and started recruiting in Mississippi and said, look, in addition to this sanitation worker stuff, we got this larger campaign going on where we're going to take these people to DC, set up and have a campaign against the government, not against the government, to show the government poverty is an issue and we need to look at it heads on. And so they were recruiting, recruiting. Let's see. But it was also a challenge for them in Memphis. They're saying, look, we got this. We dealing with this. We got a lot to deal with. We on the verge of not even being nonviolent no more. So I don't know. We cooking up down here. So 7 weeks into the protests, and they were marches all the time, you started to hear more and more calls for Black power, more and more for get Whitey, more and more for we getting sick and tired of this mess. One day they were out there and they started to kind of get a little more lively. Dr. King and the aides that he had there got him the heck up out of there. And as he got out of there, violence ensued. So this is the first march that Dr. King was a part of where violence ensued. And so, cops against the people, the same way we've been kind of seeing it, how we saw in Chicago last week when I showed that or 2 weeks ago when I showed that video. So, he really took this hard. And this kind of was a terrible thing in that now the FBI could be like, I told you, this King character, he drop in, he rile people up, and he get them to use violence. And so Dr. King is feeling like, dog, this is the exact opposite of my brand, of who I am, what I believe in. And then the government is using it to say, I told you. So he's really facing that. I went against the war. I went and down to a march that I've been, undefeated as far as no violence taking place. Now, violence taking place. I'm losing friends. I'm losing support. It's hard for me to raise money. People ain't feeling this Poor People's Campaign. So he's feeling it. And so he said, you know what? I'm not done. He went back to, focus on the Poor People's Campaign. But he came back and said, you know what? I'm going back down there for my pride and for my brand. And I'm going to make sure that we get a nonviolent march. And so he went back down there Sunday, March 31st. He went to go speak in DC and he said, I'm going back. So 4/3, March 3rd, he went back, said, we're going to lead a march that is nonviolent. And so they had business down there in Memphis anyway, because he had, like we saw in some of the other cases, there was a court ruling that said, nope, you can't march no more. Y'all got violent. You can't do it. So the SCLC sent their lawyers down there and said, we're going to get an injunction to make sure we can do this march, and we're going to do a nonviolent one, and we're going to get it done. And so that night, happy that he was back, they said, we want Dr. King to come speak. And Dr. King was like, I'm tired. I ain't really feeling it. So I'm going to send Ralph Abernathy in my stead. Well, Ralph and SCLC gets there and they say, no, we want to see Dr. King. and said, okay, all right, it was a stormy night. It was a tornado on the horizon. He's like, ain't nobody gonna be there. But he ended up going, and this is the night where he gave his famous been to the mountaintop speech. So let's take a moment from this, and I'm gonna bring up the mountaintop speech, and we're gonna watch it for a minute. My bad, y'all. I wasn't sharing my screen. Let me get it up. There we go. Good brother King.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
This is a CBS News special report.
Dan Rather reporting for CBS News from New York. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was shot to death by an assassin late today as he stood on a balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King had planned to lead another civil rights march in Memphis next Monday. We got the latest on the story now from Russ Hodge, news director of W.
Yeah. So The next day, the speech was April 3rd, 68. The next day, that next morning, Dr. King was assassinated by a sniper's bullet. We were talking about COINTELPRO and all that stuff. That brother didn't give that message without knowing something was coming. And throughout the years of protesting and fighting, death was always around the corner. But it seemed like he had some kind of insight into what was going on. It's always hard for me to get to that point. And Dr. King's story did, so much amazing work. And there was a lot of conspiracy around the same way it was with JFK. So one conspiracy was the shot didn't kill him. They said when he got sent to the hospital and what happened to the hospital, that's what killed him. Another conspiracy, and I want to be very careful with this. This was just a conspiracy, and a lot of people have said a lot of interesting things. But when you go back and look at the research, when you go back and look at people's testimony after, it seems like people felt a little more guilty than they did sad. Some of the people who were able to benefit from him being gone, those who took the leadership mantles moving forward, those who were able to navigate the system after he was gone. So it seemed like something wasn't up, or something was up. But I'll say this. The death of Dr. King had a reverberating effect in America, and we'll talk about it more in the next class because I want to center it around and go back to some of these riots. There were riots around the country. The country went up in flames. And, it kind of was the end of what we looked at as nonviolent direct action and its utility. Shortly after the Fair Housing Act was passed, but it was a dark day for America. It was a dark day for the movement, and you can see now. So just think of this thinking. So if you assassinate a man who said I'm nonviolent and I'll do anything, you can do anything you want to me, and I ain't gonna do nothing back. But what you think the people behind them gonna do? They ain't gonna use that tactic much more. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So, yeah, so that brought the movement to never a halt, but it was a very hard way to navigate forward for the movement. And I'm just pulling something up here. So April 16th, a couple weeks after Dr. King was murdered, and I'm going back to Memphis here. The strike ended in April 16th on a settlement that included union recognition that they were looking for and a wage increase, although additional strikes had to threaten the city to honor its commitment. So they got a makeshift commitment done, and the work in Memphis proceeded. So this left I'll pause there, the commitments in Memphis, and now we'll go back to the Memphis sanitation workers strike, and we'll take a full view of that, and then we'll move on in our story to Resurrection City.
Early in the 60s, I started working for the sanitation department during that time, and going behind people's houses, picking up garbage. Our condition was poor during that time. They had one man up in the truck, one man, and then we go in people's backyard, we get the tub, bring it out the yard. You bring it out like this, or tote it like this, or tote it like this. Most times it'd be so heavy, we had to tote it like this, on my head. Sometimes the tub had holes in it, and garbage would run down all in my face, bags and stuff all over my face. And then when I had ride the bus home, but I couldn't ride the bus home because I smelled too bad. And they said, "Oh God, man, you smell so bad, you can't ride them." So I didn't ride the bus. I walked home. I always thought that it could have been better during that time for sanitation workers, because we struggled to have what we got now. During that time, it really was tough for me. It really was tough. I had a family to feed, and I had to have a job. And I get up in the morning during that time, going to work, and I look over there and see my kids. And I had to work. I had to have a job. Black couldn't get too many jobs. It wasn't too many jobs open for black. And we just had to do the best thing we could do. During that time, the city didn't treat us like we were supposed to be treated. We couldn't have no peaceful march because the police was with the city and they were behind it. And when you go march down Main Street, a lot of times we couldn't march without the police messing with us. To get off the sidewalk and all that, call us different names. Get off the sidewalk, boys. Do this here, boys. And to me, it wasn't right. See, it wasn't right. I heard it through some of the people at the Union Hall said Dr. King was coming to Memphis, and during that time, I was glad for him to come. I think everybody was glad for him to come. We thought maybe we'd get some justice that way. People was glad to see Dr. King. You'd be surprised how people were so glad to see Dr. King. Everybody said, "Dr. King gonna march one day," and you seen garbage men and different people start march together, because we heard he was coming to march, and they had a great march during that time. His voice, this his peers to him to come here, did a lot for the city of Memphis. When he got shot, they said, "Dr. King just got shot." Everything in Memphis broke out. Everything. Some places in Memphis you couldn't go. They had army trucks. Just had tanks coming down the street, different part of the town. And they had a curfew. During that time, you couldn't go nowhere. During that curfew, after he got killed. After he got killed, the next 2 weeks, but it came around. And we were glad it did. But one thing I said about Dr. King, he was a great man. And if it wasn't been for him, we'd still been in the predicament we was during that time. And most of the time, I don't like to talk about it. It do something to me. Because as he came here to Memphis and got killed, this did something to me. And most time I talk about it, sometimes I just think about how it was during that time. Because during that time it was rough for the sanitation people. Because I seen things that I know it was wrong. But one person couldn't do nothing about it. It took Dr. King come out here and straighten it out. And I'm glad he did.
Yeah, so there was a lot of, Memphis took it hard to be the city where Dr. King was killed. And I think, it was a documentary that came out when I think it was maybe when I was just finishing up undergrad, where they talked about this was a lone wolf situation and somebody came and they did all this. Man, please. So, Dr. King's gone. Country went up in flames. Burn, baby, burn. But there was still some meat on the bone that had to be seen about. Anytime somebody gets, murdered, you say, well, they would have wanted us to continue to work. They would have. And so SCLC continued forward with the Poor People's Campaign. 5 weeks after Dr. King was murdered, the march made it all the way to DC. Remember, they were going from different places, marching to get to DC, and then they were going to build Tent City, or Resurrection City. Excuse me. And so under the leadership of Reverend Abernathy, Jesse Jackson, and Andrew, let me stop. So under new leadership, the movement moved forward. You had people building tents on the lawn at the memorials and building a city there. The plan was to march to the departments every day and send people to the agriculture department, to the health and human services, to all these departments. But running the city, actually keeping people fed and keeping sanitation moving and all those things, was consuming SCLC. No time to plan, no time to lobby. And then the rain came. So, rainstorm came in and just beat the place up. And so now it looked like you in a big mud bowl. If you saw what was going on at the Roots picnic the other week, it's kind of like that. I'm just saying that tongue in cheek. To make matters worse, June 4th, 68, RFK, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And that was kind of where some of the hope for some of this change was going to happen, though Dr. King was gone. And kind of broke the spirits of those in the movement at that point. People began to leave. Police came to break down the city, and 81 days after King was killed, the march and the Resurrection City Poor People's Campaign ended with nothing kind of show for it. The people were beat down. Their leader was gone. Assassinations persisted. And now the torch is officially handed over to the Black Power individuals who are left to kind of sort through what they're going to do without a Malcolm, without a Martin, pissed off, and without the foundation that the direct nonviolent action had. So now you have a movement in transition. And so let's look at the Poor People's Campaign, and then we'll transition to our last kind of points we're going to make here, because we're just about done. All right, I'm going to share my screen.
Daily Dose, the Poor People's Campaign. In November of 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. and his Southern Christian Leadership Conference decided to undertake the Poor People's Campaign in an attempt to demand economic justice for the nation's poor.
We read one day, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if a man doesn't have a job or an income, he has neither life nor liberty and the possibility for the pursuit of happiness. He merely exists. Estimated that we spend $322,000 for each enemy we kill in Vietnam, while we spend in the so-called war on poverty in America only about $53 for each person classified as poor.
After King's unjust assassination on April 4th, 1968, which led to widespread rioting in most major American cities, King's longtime friend and fellow civil rights activist, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, stepped in to fulfill King's vision of a mass protest on Washington, D.C., while the Reverend Jesse Jackson stepped in as city manager to what would become known as Resurrection City. Busloads of a broad coalition of Native Americans, white, Latino, and African Americans began arriving into the district on May the 12th, 1968, occupying the 15-acre makeshift tent city near the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, holding daily protests against federal lawmakers' dogged inaction on poverty. For the next 6 weeks, some 2,700 protesters endured harsh living conditions, including rain, mud, heat, and high humidity, as well as frequent clashes with police. The beleaguered demonstration culminated with the Poor People's March of June 19, 1968, with an estimated 50,000 people in attendance, including speeches by Vice President Hubert Humphrey, Democratic presidential candidate Eugene McCarthy, Abernathy, and King's widow, Coretta Scott King. Distracted by ongoing racial tensions and the Vietnam War, the Poor People's Campaign came to an end on June 24th, when a 36-day permit terminated the demonstrators' legal right of assembly, and when 500 protesters refused to vacate their soggy encampment. Authorities used tear gas to disperse the remaining crowds. More than 100 protesters were arrested during the melee, including Abernathy. And while the Poor People's Campaign failed to bring about any significant anti-poverty legislation by Congress, it marked the first time that the civil rights movement expanded beyond demands for racial equality to include interracial class issues and economic goals for the nation's poor, making the Poor People's Campaign the last bold act of nonviolent protest by a nation's revered and fallen hero. And there you have it, the Poor People's Campaign, today on the Daily Dose. Get your nerd on with the Daily Dose. And if you enjoyed today's episode,
See, I'm on mute. I was about to start going. And there you have it, my people. AAS 477, Power and Protest 54 through 68. We ended on the Poor People's Campaign and the start of the transition to Black Power as the Black liberation, as the philosophy of the late 60s and through the 70s. We will move forward in our AAS journey. So this ends the class for civil rights. But let's take a moment to kind of reflect on a couple of things. So I'm going to bring up my screen again. Poor People's Campaign goals and genesis. We kind of talked through that, organizing around it, Resurrection City and the symbol. The marches and protests. I'm gonna edit that part out. Protest and lobby efforts in DC that didn't really get too far. The Memphis strike and everything that they had and what they were aspiring to. It seems like we were aspiring and fighting for the same things over and over and over and over and over. And seems like there's still a lot on the table for us to do this. Leadership and transition, we talked about that. Challenges and decline of the Poor People's Campaign, the legacy of the Poor People's Campaign, and Dr. King's enduring vision for in an unfinished work. I'll say this. Dr. King's assassination turned the page. It gave people something to look back at and to honor and to acknowledge. It emboldened people to move forward. So people who of the thousands and thousands of people that went and participated in civil rights, some became judges, some became Congress people, some became business leaders, some became teachers, doctors, lawyers, all facets of life. So giving his life for the movement and for the work inspired the next generations of would-be activists, people in the process, people moving through legal and traditional reigns, and it gave people something to aspire to and fight for. Him broadening his scope in the end, only helped for what would come in the future. And later his wife petitioned for his birthday to be a federal holiday, and today we have that. I don't want to go through the key questions here. Yeah, we talked about that. Role of media, economics. Yeah, so just, when I think about Dr. King and I think about 57 years later, I agree. 57 years later, it appears that we are no further ahead. Shame on the United States. And, I think one of my main, so the promised land, I do want to talk about that a little bit. So the promised land meant a lot of things to a lot of people, because as we look through the lens of the next class, which is the Black Power class, which will go from 1968 to 1980, we see that there were a lot of versions of the promised land. Affirmative action came and allowed for there to be the corporatization of the Black individual. So we got further in corporate America than we ever had. We were able to go and be that first. So if you think about this, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but kind of a preview. One aspect or a couple aspects we'll look at moving forward is how the Black liberation movement was undermined by COINTELPRO, but the progress that they made, how the image of the African American made it off of the newsreel and into the sitcom. We saw the Jeffersons, we saw What's Happening, we saw Good Times, we saw the Richard Pryor Show, we saw Soul Train, we saw all these different kind of constitutions of what it means to be Black. We saw Blaxploitation films come into the mix. So it was a means by which to showcase African Americans, not always in the best regard, but you saw them there. We saw Black business take a move forward. We saw people like Ali and other people just kind of take the march forward. We saw even into the 80s where you saw a change from the 70s, and where you saw the Cosby Show and A Different World, and also we saw the Black political power grow. In Atlanta, Maynard Jackson became the first Black mayor of a major city. Coleman Young in Detroit became first Black mayor of a major city. We saw Harold Washington in Chicago become a Black mayor, one of the first Black mayors of a major city. Marion Barry in DC. So we saw political power. We saw how that political power led to corporate power. Now government contracts could be instituted. Business moving forward. You saw so many fruits of the work, but also more work to do. So the 70s brought a different kind of fight, still a fight for Black liberation, but because we wanted into their society so bad, they gave us a slot and we navigated how we always do, up. So we'll look at some of those things moving forward. We'll also look at how the role of our culture manifested itself through the Black arts movement and how we wanted to go closer to a Garvey nationalist, Black back to Africa kind of Black is beautiful, Black pride. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. Looking internally to say, you know what? We wanted a seat at your table. We saw that table might not be as sturdy as we wanted. So let's look back at our own people and wear our hair a certain way and take new names of Shakur and Amiri Baraka and all these different names, Kwame Ture. How can we look back at our own selves and find pride in who we are? Maybe we don't want what we thought we wanted. And so as we move forward, we're definitely going to have some of those conversations in the next class. So what you can expect moving forward, however, is we're going to take a break next week because the class is over. I'm going to send out a course evaluation to everybody on my list, and then I'm going to drop the link to it here. It's very important for me to know how the class can be improved. If you enjoyed the class, what you got out of it. And a part of my approach is to document how this goes forward. I put a lot of time, effort, energy, and myself being into this. And I would love to get an idea of how you feel about it. So anybody with this link, just copy and paste it, and you'll get a link to a Google form where I ask you a couple of questions about this class. I did the same thing for my last class. I'm going to do the same thing for the next class. It's important for me as an instructor to know, one, how did the material come across, if it made an impact, and how I can get better at it. So if nothing else, even if you don't come back, take that course. No, come back, but take that course evaluation. It's only a few questions, and I want you to do that. So next week, I'll take a break. and start to prepare. I've already been preparing for the Black Power class, but then we'll spend 1 week, was going to be 2, but we'll spend 1 on celebrating Black Music Month. June is Black Music Month, and I've been doing a lot of research around the beginnings of soul music and rock, or R&B music and rock and roll, into Motown. You know, I love Motown. I've been really enjoying watching a lot of movies, and I'll drop that list next week. And 2 weeks from now, that's probably what I'll do. It won't be like this. It's not a class. It's just a celebration of Black Music Month. So we'll definitely do that, and you'll see you'll get a notification from me from that. And then either sometime in early July or mid-July, I still have some research to do to get ready for the course. I spent a lot of time reading, watching documentaries, looking and doing my own research to set a curriculum that fits what I think we need to do. And I want to spend a couple weeks on that. And so you have all the resources that I gave you to continue your work going down the hole. If for some reason you aren't on the email list and you want to get on the email list and you want to get the resources that I provide, because after every class, I provide the deck, I provide the outline for the class, and then resources, links to websites you can visit, books, documentaries you can watch. If you want to be a part of that, drop your email in the chat, and I'll get that information to you. I also want to let you know that if you have any questions for me, you can give me an email at dbarnesj@gmail.com. I'm going to drop the link to the Facebook page as well. Give me 1 second. I should have had it, but I didn't. To the Facebook page, so you can get affiliated with the page. The page is going to stay the same, though the name is going to change. Right now, it's AAS 477 Civil Rights Movement. It's going to change to Black Power. That'll be the next class. Let me share out the page. Give me just a second here. And then you can join that as well. Let me see. Here, what I'll do is I'll provide a link to the most recent post that I had there, and then you can join it this way. So also here, that's my email address. This is the Facebook page. Be sure to share, like this YouTube page. It's been an honor and a privilege for you to be with me for 10 weeks. This was the first class was only 5. This was 10. So I wanted to make it deeper and more rich because I had so much more information to share. There's still so much more information to share. And I'm glad that you've been around for this journey for me. I'm proud of myself. Like Snoop said, I want to thank myself for sticking to it and ensuring that nothing got in the way of presenting this information. We're living in trying times, and looking back at how our ancestors navigated will give us the strength, the courage, and the wherewithal to endure what we need to endure moving forward. It's been an amazing 10 weeks. I have nothing but love and respect for the people who've been around for me on this journey, for the civil rights activists that made this stuff happen every single day, the lives that were lost, the money that was spent, everybody that gave their life for this, for the movement. And now it's our turn to be a part of this. Now it's our turn to be advocates, allies into this fight. So for AAS 477, Civil Rights, 1954 to 1968, we are signing off. Thank you for being with me. I appreciate everything. And we're going to do it again, and we're going to talk Black Power, 1968 to 1980. What you'll see is on my social media, I'll put a sign-up link to join the class. You'll see the full class outline, and you can join the class that way. And then we're going to do it similar to how we did it here. And I'll see you then, and we'll be gearing up to do our next class. I appreciate you. I love you. And just know that there's nothing that we're going to face in this time that our ancestors hadn't faced. And maybe now it's our time to be out there doing what we need to do. So it's the final sign off for AAS 477, Power and Protest. I will see you next time. It's been an honor to serve, and it's been an honor to share. I'm out. Peace. Dwayne Barnes, MPA, and we're going to do it again next time. Peace, y'all.